me, Becky. It's good to see you. You are a masterpiece. It's true. There's no denying it. Well, today we're going to hear from a friend of mine who is named Diane. She is a stained glass artist, so she'll take us through the fine art of breaking pieces of glass apart and putting them back together to make something beautiful. This is definitely something that we aren't doing on our own, and when Diane works, she definitely wears eye protection and that sort of thing, but it's beautiful to see how this art comes together. I hope you enjoy seeing the how-to process, and I hope you enjoy learning about this close up and seeing closer than we could see on our own. So this will be an adventure. I hope you enjoy it.
Ever since I can remember, I've liked to do things with my hands. And as I grew older, I was involved with macrame and painting and sewing and knitting, anything you could do with your hands. Um, then, when I moved to our new house, there was a place where I wanted a stained glass window. But at that time, that was way beyond my budget. However, there was a woman in downtown Belleville who offered classes. Now, I was teaching, so during the summer, I took a class and I loved it. It was just, he had to be just exact, he had to be careful, and he had beautiful colors, so I liked it. But when I started teaching again the next year, I discovered that there was no time. So I had to make time. So I took a class in the evening, one day a week. That went on until that class was over, and then I took another one, an advanced class. Then I took one in lamps. Then she moved away. But by that time I had already joined the Michigan Glass Guild, which had glass artists from all over the Detroit area. All different kinds of glass, etched glass and blown glass, and um, the kind of glass I was learning how to do, which is leaded glass. Uh, After a couple years there, I joined the Stained Glass Association of America. And in that group, there are glass artists from all over the United States. So I made friends in Massachusetts and Texas and California and Mississippi. It was wonderful. And we would sit around the table and laugh and talk, and I'd see somebody from, I don't know, all over. Now, those artists were all different kinds. There were large studios that had 30 people in them. And there were small studios with one or two, and then there were single people like me who worked alone. Uh, from the Stained Glass Association, I took many seminars and workshops. Some were all over, they were all over the country and Germany and Mexico. So it was wonderful experiences. Uh, at the same time, I was starting to get commissions. And everything that I ever got, I got by word of mouth. One thing led to another, which led to another, which led to another. But all the time, I just like to do my own thing. So I have a couple of criteria for what I make. And one of them is that it has to have beauty to it. I don't like, there are some stained glass artists who like to make dreary, ugly stuff, and that just turns me off. I like things that are not pretty necessarily, but uplifting. It's led to making some church windows, and church windows are my favorite. because it is like a silent witness. It tells a story. I don't like stained glass in churches that is abstract and you can't tell what it is. I like windows that have a story. So I've done churches in Belleville and Monroe and Waltz. I think I've done 9 churches altogether. So churches are my favorite. But now that I'm getting older, I find that really large windows are too heavy. I do it by myself, and taking a large window like this and turning it over and carrying it and all that is just, it's too hard. So I'm down to making smaller things, but I've done side lights, I've done kitchen cabinets, I've done individual panels to hang in windows. They're called autonomous panels because they're meant to stand alone. There's a children's book called Ramona Quimby, and Ramona Quimby, her dad asked her what she likes to do best, and she said, I like to make things out of think. And I think that's really cool because actually think and getting an idea is the first step of making a stained glass window. So that's how I got into stained glass and kind of what I do. I'm taking you through the steps of making a stained glass window. The first thing you need is an idea. You can get an idea from nature, you can get an idea from books. Now, I happen to really like Celtic knotwork, and so this one that I'm showing you today, I took a little piece of something from Celtic knotwork. This pattern that I chose, this was the first thing that I did. This is just a sketch. And from the sketch, you enlarge it to be a full-size drawing. And a full-size drawing like this is called a cartoon. And you can probably see that there's numbers on here because what I did, I drew this, that's the second step. The third step is to trace it. And I have super sheets of carbon paper. And so I just make a carbon copy. It looks like this. This is a piece that hasn't been cut out. I saved it especially to show you how I cut it out. And if you notice, there's numbers here. And the reason that there's numbers is that when you cut it out, here's a piece that's cut. I have E5 on it. If I didn't have E5 on it and I cut this out and took the pattern piece off and I looked at this, I would have no idea where it goes. But since there's a number on it, I can find E5, that's where it goes. So I've traced it, I put numbers on it, and on these, you notice that there's red lines because there is a grain to glass. And you want the grain to go the way you want it to. You don't want it just to go every which way. It's called fracture streamy. I think that's cool. It's made Fremont Studios in Seattle, Washington. But look at all the striations and stuff in that piece. I haven't used it yet. Hand blown glass. And it has a pink layer across the back here. That's what they did. They call that flashed glass. These are called pattern shears. And the reason they're called pattern shears is that they have 3 blades. And when I'm just going to cut. When you cut, there's a little tiny piece that's gone here. And you cut your pattern out with that so that there is room for the copper wrapping that's on the pieces. So I cut it all out and then choose what glass to use. And using the light table over there and just what I know about glass, I can hold pieces up and look. I decide how I'm going to, what colors I'm going to use for this. You can see how I had to choose what colors to use. All right, once I've chosen what colors to use, I cut out the glass. And I have cut this piece out, and it's pretty good, but see, this is another thing where I like to be exact, but there's a little tiny bit left on the edge that I didn't quite get. So that's when I use the grinder. Now this, you're gonna hear a little bit of noise, but this is what happens when you're grinding glass. E5 has been cleaned off. And in the process of cleaning it off, I have made this edge exactly perpendicular, and I've roughened it up. It's called tooth. And that just means that there's a rough edge to it that helps the copper foil to stick. So I'm going to put this right on E5. Now, if I were making the window the way I always make a window, I would cut all the pieces first, and then I would start doing the next step. But I wanted to show you all the steps. So this is just a piece of glass. This is a glass cutter, which is a little diamond wheel. And there's oil in here to lubricate it. Now, my daughter hates this sound. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it or not, but it's sort of like nails on a chalkboard. Now, this is called a breaking pliers, and you notice that they're curved a little bit. So you put it right on where you did the run, and when you push, it pushes the glass apart. Here's a safety lesson. I cut the glass here, and there's little tiny scraps of glass. And you don't know what it's like until you get a sliver with a clear piece of glass that you can't see. So one of the first lessons in safety is always keep your work surface clean and brushed off. All right, I have the pieces cut. I have them cleaned. The next step, make sure that all the dust from grinding it is taken off. The next step is to wrap it in foil. And I have two widths of foil here, one a little bit thinner and this one that is a little bit thicker that I'm going to use for here. And you have to center it on the piece of glass, and then you start to work your way around. Enough that it will overlap just a little tiny bit, and then you have to crimp it down and use a dowel or something to really seal the copper foil down. Turn it over and do the other side. Now, as you can see, this takes quite a while. I have probably 100 pieces in here, and you can't you can't expect someone to make something like this for $2.50. You have to consider the amount of labor. You have to consider the materials. Now, the materials that I'm using here, this piece of green, is hand-blown glass. And hand-blown glass is made by blowing a bubble. It's about this big around and about this, a big sausage, sort of like. They blow that bubble and then cool it, anneal it. Then they cut the ends off and make a cut down the side, put it back in the kiln, and they use like a big wooden wet spatula. They heat it up again until it starts to sag, and then they smooth it all out, and you get glass like this that has all sorts of striations and bubbles. I don't know if you can see the bubbles and the striations, but that's what you get with hand-blown glass. This piece is also hand-blown, but it is called English. It's made in England, and they blow a bubble, but then they blow it into a box. And when it's cooled, they cut the edges of the box, and so you get like this. And I have some pieces of this, and this kind of glass goes from super, super thin, where it was in the middle of the box, to almost 1/4 of an inch thick on the edges. It's very hard to cut, but I managed to find enough pieces that I could cut to make these that I wanted that match the colors. Okay, I got it all cut out. Then I take 2 pieces of wood and I nail them so that they are right on the edge of the window. Okay. So that when I'm making the window, I can butt it up against the wood and make sure each time I do it that I can see the line. And then I put the next layer, and oops, this one has to, wait a minute. And I use horseshoe nails to hold it in place because horseshoe nails are flat. So I can put this here and hold that so it won't go anywhere. And I put one here. So the next piece is, I normally wouldn't do this one next. I would do this one. I would work from here up and out until I finished it. Now, if you notice there's copper here, when I go to solder it, the solder will only stick to the copper. It makes the solder joints, and you make a nice bead on them. Now on this one, once I finished, I put some dots to be decorative soldering. So, but you see how these lines are. And if you notice, they're dark because when you finish soldering, it's all bright solder. It's all bright and shiny. And you want it to be darker than that. So I have stuff here that's called patina. And patina is an acid chemical. You have to wash it off as soon as you do it so it doesn't harm the glass. But it darkens the solder joints. It darkens the solder joints so that, okay, this side here you can see them better because there's no decorative here. Let me tell you a secret. I just noticed that. I know why. I didn't, when I first made this, I didn't plan to have decorative soldering. However, when I soldered, this was a long, thin strip of glass, and there's a heat crack right here. It cracked right in the middle. So I made a cover for it. And once I put a cover there, you can't just put that right in the middle and not have anything else. So then that started out the whole decorating stuff. So there's always tricks to the trade in whatever you do. Once it's soldered together, you wash it very carefully to wash, and then you patina it and wash it again, and then I buy those shoe polish sponges that are clear, and I rub it on the piece and it shines it up, and then polish it with a cloth. So I wash it with a soap that's meant to remove flux. Oh, I didn't tell you about flux. If I tried to solder this right now, the solder would just glump up there because there's oil from my fingers and there's probably some dirt and stuff. Flux is sort of a cleanser that cleans the copper so that the solder sticks really well. But you have to wash it off or it can harm the glass, especially fine hand blown glass. Well, I've plugged in the soldering iron and it takes a little bit to get it hot. So I thought that I would tell you just a couple things about the history of stained glass. Glass was used since Roman times, but it was only in the early Middle Ages that they started to put glass together into windows, breaking the pieces up and putting them into pictures. And the earliest one that they have whole came from the 900s. So that's a long time. And basically, we do the same thing. We cut glass into pieces and we put it back together in a different way. Um, in the early ages of stained glass, most of the buildings were what they call Romanesque, which means there were very thick walls. The openings in the walls were rounded, like round arches, and the windows were small because they had to have the thick walls to support the roof. Well, if you have that, you want as much light to come in as possible. So there were not very many stained glass windows then. But then in the late Middle Ages, they came up with flying buttresses which supported the walls from the outside so they could build them up taller, thinner, with big windows. And when they had big windows, they decided to fill them with pictures because most of the people could not read. So they would make Bible stories and lessons with stained glass pictures. Well, all the time, all through the ages, people have done pretty much the same things. Most churches you go into would have stained glass windows, even today. Um, Now, about 1900, a man named Louis Tiffany started to make stained glass, and he used what we call copper foil, which is what I showed you. Like Scotch tape with it's sticky on one side and it has copper on the other. And when you wrap it around the pieces, it looks like this. You see the copper. Now I'm going to solder the back of this. I made this for a friend who is a quilter, so you can see that it's quilt. Um, just to show you what happens. I'll see if it's hot enough yet. If it's hot enough, it will wipe off shiny. Okay, I think it's hot enough. Here is the solder. Comes in spools like this. This is the flux that I should brush on. But I wanted to show you what happens if I try to solder without flux. Because flux, notice that it's lumpy and it won't lay down. Now, if I take the flux and brush it over this same area, I'm going to do this part, this arm of the cross. Now I take that same globbed up solder and it just sticks just nicely to the copper. So I start, first thing I do is I go around the outside edge with a line. You want to be careful if you come to a place where a bunch of lines come together so that you don't have a big glob of solder there. Some people have said, well, what happens if you get a glob of solder and it falls on the glass? Well, no, I can't make one stick there. All right, that's on the glass. We'll let it cool off and then I'll show you what happens to it. This is a fan that blows air away from me so that I don't breathe in the solder fumes, because the solder fumes might have some lead in them. And here, there is a lot of tension across here. If this hung like this for a while, it would bend upward and fall, the arms of the cross would fall off. So to keep that from happening, what I've done is take a little piece of iron bar called rebar, and I've covered it with solder. That is because solder needs hotter heat to fasten to iron than it does to copper. So if I tried to tin this as it's on here, I would heat crack the glass. Now this piece right here is going to go right across here and strengthen it. And I've cut it this length because it follows a line of the design, and because I put it on the back, you'll never see it when it's hanging. So I'm just going to start this just to show you. Guess what? I didn't flux it. And you solder it to the piece. Each place that the rebar crosses a seam, and you do it on one side and then you do it on the other side. Now, it doesn't show from this side, but it's back here, and it is greatly strengthening the stability of the cross. I wanted to show you. Remember that little glob of solder I put on the glass? Here's what happens if once it's cooled. Comes right off. How about that? Now, so I'm going to go around the outside edge. I always flip this, give myself a piece that's sticking up so I can grab it. You can touch the soldering iron to the solder and take a little piece with you. Now, what I'm doing is to build what they call a bead on the outside edge. See that? Might as well use the piece that I had. Now, when I get to a corner like that, see how that just dripped around the edge? You have to just sort of just touch the corner or it just drips off because it's liquid. Now, of course, before I finish this, I will go all around the whole outside. But we're only doing this one arm to show you all the steps because I think you'd kind of like to see how the whole thing goes together. Now I have a border on the outside edge. Okay. The other thing that you need a way to hang it up. I took a piece of wire and here's a straight piece. I take a nail and I wind this around the nail and I twist it. Now I have a thing that's crooked. I'm going to cut off the little tail that's left over and use my flat pliers and there I have a hanger. And I put it where I want it to be. This hanger will go right here. I can get it started. Oops. See how hot that is? And it's hot. It's really hot if it touches your skin. So that's what pliers are for. I will hold this right where I want it. And solder it on. Now I am going to follow the lines of the design, so I have to bend this. So I'm not going to do that right now. Here's the hook to hang it up with. And you don't see where this is going because it's following the lines of the design. It's going to go over here and then touch onto this to hook it all together when it's finished. Notice that this is a straight line that goes all the way across. That straight line right there is going to make a hinge. This could just bend back and forth because there's only one straight line of solder right there. So besides this heavier steel, and what I've done, I made this little thing and I'm going to solder it right there on top of that, and that will brace that seam right there. Many times when you're building a larger window, you want to use lead cane instead of copper foil because it is a little bit more forgiving for large windows. But when you have when you have something that you want to reinforce, you can take this copper and put it right into the heart of the lead and then put the glass in and it will strengthen. So this is good stuff to have. Now here's a danger. We've been talking and this soldering iron has been sitting here getting hotter and hotter, which is not a good thing. And if I were to forget and go upstairs and leave it here, it would not be good. So when I'm finished soldering, the last thing that I always do is unplug it. Get the water nice and hot. Squirt just a little soap on it. Now I'm going to lay it down in here and scrub it. Rinse it off. Now I'm just going to patina this one edge that I did the back of so that you can see what happens. All right, patina is an acid. It's a chemical that will darken the lead lines. So I just use a piece of paper towel or a piece of sponge or something and start rubbing. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go because I want. All right, what do I do next? I wash it again. Because if I leave that acid on the glass, it will etch the glass, and I don't want that. Okay, now it is, see how it's darker, but it's kind of dull. Now comes the magic part. This is just a plain old shoe shine thing that you can buy any place where they sell shoes, and it's just a clear sponge with clear fine wax on it. And I rub it on here, and then I take a cloth and I shine it, and so that's the way it turns out. But last time we were here, I was building a piece and I showed it to you all laid out on the table. Well, it's finished now. The hangers go along this line and down a little bit. Along this line and down in the back, so that it supports the whole thing. If I just put a little tiny ring up here, which is what I did when I very first started glass, I didn't run it down into the pattern. But a little ring here lasts, oh, I don't know, maybe a couple of months, and then the weight of the piece will pull it off. So you gotta think engineering a little bit. So that's what this one is. There are like 3 things to look at. And one of them is what color you want to use. And glass will come in just about any color you can imagine. So color is one thing. And texture is another thing. Now this is a machine glass, but it's real ripply. And this is a piece of super ripply glass. And I've had this, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But I just saw it and I thought, this is really cool. So now, glass this ripply is impossible to cut on this side. So what you have to do is to cut it on the wrong side. And when you cut glass on the wrong side, you have to put the pieces that you're cutting out upside down, so that when you turn them over, you get. And then another thing that glass has, see how that has kind of, this is called iridized glass. And it has some chemical sprayed on it while it's hot. And it makes the glass do that. So you have color, you have texture, and you have translucent. How much color goes through the glass. Now this is very translucent. This is very opaque because you can't see through it. When I make kitchen cabinets, one of the first questions I always ask is, do you want to be able to see in your cupboard? Some people really want to because they're going to show off and other people don't want the mess to show. So we make their windows out of opaque glass. How to cut an inside curve. That's what I want to cut. Glass doesn't like to break in a curve, it likes to break straight. So what I'm going to do is to make an arc like that. And I'll cut the arc off. Now I've done so many of these that I can pretty much draw several arcs before I start breaking. So let's see how this goes. First I'll break this first one off. Note, when I start to break and I start from one corner, I can do it just, see how it just started and it just broke part way, but not all the way. Then I can go to the other side, do the same thing, and break it off. And this one will be easier because it's a lot more straight. And I have one last one to do, and then I'm just following the line. Okay, notice that there are several bits and pieces that didn't come off exactly the way I wanted. These are groziers, Grozier, and they will nibble away at extra pieces of glass. And then the rest of it I would do with the grinder. But there you are, with an inside curve. Glass likes to break straight, so I can't cut that out. This is the piece I want. So what I'm going to do, first I'm going to brush away my crumbs of glass. Then I'm going to start by just getting it off of that. Now, what I'm going to do, and straight, and straight, and straight. And then I'm going to break there, break that off, break that off, break that off. Then I'll take the groziers and I'll nibble away there, there. There it is. When I finish a piece and I want to sign it, first I make a C with a circle around it, and that means copyright. And it's sort of a symbolic gesture because anybody could take this design and just change a couple lines and say, oh, it's not the same, so it's not copyrighted. But it gives you a little protection. Then I sign either my initials if it's small or my whole name if it's larger, and then the year. Now, I have things in a gallery in Frankfort, Michigan, which is up on Lake Michigan. And Ray Huff, the owner, has asked me not to put the year on things that I make for his shop because if something doesn't sell and it's there the next summer, people look at it and think it's old, so they're not as interested. So I'm only supposed to write my name on those things. But I'm going to write my name on it. And it's going to make a lot of noise. This is an engraver and it has a little diamond tip on it. There. And copyright D.I. Singer 2020.
Good to see you. Welcome back. Wasn't Diane great? I'm so glad she shared with us about how to make art. Her stained glass work is beautiful, and like she shared, it's all over her own area, and she studied and taught abroad even. So I hope you enjoy and appreciate stained glass art that much more. Have a beautiful day. You are a masterpiece. Bye.